Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chiseled. And why do we call it Chiseled? Because we're all a work in progress. I'm your host. I'm Rob Commodari. I'm also the author of the book Better Than You Think and co-author of the book Next Level Your Life. But today is about my guest, Eric Clayton. Eric Clayton is the Deputy Director of Communications at the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States. In his role, he manages the award-winning weekly column, Now Discern This, a series on Ignatian spirituality, which we'll get into, and everyday living. As well, he produces video, audio, and other digital content to share the riches of Ignatian spirituality with a general audience. Eric is also the author of two books, which we're going to get into as well. My Life with the Jedi, the spirituality of Star Wars, which I can't wait to talk about, and Cannonball Moments, tell your story, deepening your faith, both from Loyola Press. A third book on Ignatian spirituality and peace is forthcoming from, and I might be pronouncing this wrong, Brazos Press, and that's due to come out in 2025. So you'll be able to learn more from that. I'll talk about this again too at ericclaytonwrites.com. Eric is also a family man. He's married with two girls, and he lives locally here in Baltimore. So some local flavor here, although he's from Philly at first, but I guess Baltimore boy right now. So anyway, Eric, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me, man. This is awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is great. Eric was introduced to me by another guest we had not too long ago by Katie. God, I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Kilzeski. I think I said it right. Kelly, you'll kill me later. That's okay. Anyway, so Eric, tell us a little bit about your journey here to where you are. You got two books, a third coming. You're working in the Ignatian, with the Ignatian, I guess, the Jesuit Conference of Canada in the United States. Right. So give us a little background.
Yeah, well, I mean, as listeners can deduce from those books, I really only have one trick, and it's writing about Ignatian spirituality. But I've arrived in this place, right? I studied writing as an undergraduate at Fairfield University. The story I tell, and I tell it because it's true. I loved writing stories like fiction and stuff, and I would share them with my grandmother, and she would give me like line edits, and so I would be writing these kind of like fantastical stories about elves and dragons, and my like elderly grandmother would be commenting on my world building, which is always like very funny and kind of a really dear memory for me because she was herself a writer. So that kind of was my beginning as a writer, and then I studied writing at Fairfield, as well as international studies. That brought me to work at Catholic Relief Services, which is why I'm in Baltimore. But I always was writing. Always was how do I tell stories that matter? How do I share stories that are important? And how do I think there's always this little kind of nudge, whisper in my ear. I should be writing. I should be this is something I want to develop and grow in. So eventually I found myself with the opportunity to work at the Jesuit Conference, where I do a lot of communications work. And just kind of the moment allowed for a lot of kind of storytelling and storytelling that intersected with spirituality, right? How are we telling stories that reveal God at work in our lives, and then also invite, and this is the important part, invite readers to find God at work in their lives. And I can go into details and stuff, but kind of long story short is my work there, right? Allowed me to kind of get confidence in my writing and pitch these different book ideas and develop writing relationships, and that's kind of the long story short. It also helped me to deepen my own spiritual identity kind of in the Ignatian tradition, which is the foundational insight of St. Ignatius of Loyola, who, one of the co-founders of the Jesuits, and certainly Ignatian spirituality, that's his name in there, right? Is that God is to be found in all things. And when we take that idea seriously, it's pretty intense, right? Because you're saying, God isn't just, in the flowers and the butterflies, but God is in every part of my own story, right? What makes me unique, the details and the good and the bad, God is at work there, which invites a great deal of reflection, which I know, Rob, you're right about, like how are we becoming aware and attentive to our own unfolding stories. So that's kind of a project I'm constantly working on is kind of writing that out in different ways and different mediums, and using different stories, both personal and kind of those of pop culture, which is where the Star Wars book comes in, to tease out this idea of, well, how is God at work in these stories, in the unfolding story of creation?
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I really like that. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I haven't read it yet, but just from, as you said, deduction, I can sit here and think that your book and my book, there's going to be a lot of similarities and reasoning behind it. So that's pretty cool. So I was going to ask you, yeah, I think you answered it already, but if you could repeat it if you have to, is what is Ignatian spirituality? What is that exactly?
Yeah, so Saint Ignatius of Loyola, right? He was a soldier from the Basque region of Spain, kind of minor nobility. He, he's all about kind of winning wars and wooing women in his early years, and eventually he finds himself at the Battle of Pamplona. His crew is overwhelmed by the superior French forces. He refuses to surrender. He's injured. He gets a cannonball to the leg, and that is kind of where the phrase "cannonball moments" comes from. But because we're talking about these kind of trajectory changing instances in our lives, that can be pretty brutal, pretty tragic and traumatic. These moments where we have the opportunity to say, you know what, like let me assess kind of where I am in my life. Ignatius does that, and he puts down his sword. He becomes pilgrim in many ways, and then goes on to found the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus, right? A Catholic order of priests and brothers globally. But in doing that, kind of the process of that is he has this intense experience of prayer, which is the basis for his spiritual exercises. The spiritual exercises of Ignatius is like a 4-week intensive retreat experience, guided retreat that invites people to discover their full selves. Like, who is God inviting me to be? What is my vocation? How is God at work in my story? He does that through the imagination. There's a lot of imaginative prayer, contemplation, and then experience. One of the key things about Ignatius is he's really big on getting out into the world, which then comes into play with the way the Jesuits live. The Jesuits, founded in the mid 1500s, were different than other religious orders because they lived in the world. They didn't live in monasteries. All this to say, to answer your question, is Ignatian spirituality is constantly being kind of formed and understood from the very beginning of Ignatius's life and writings. He as a person plays a big role in Ignatian spirituality, but then how it's interpreted throughout the history of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, influences that. The key thing is God is in all things. It's worth getting out there into the world. But Ignatian spirituality, its tools, its principles are often seen as ways to make good decisions. How do we discern between the good spirit and the bad spirit? How do we make these decisions so as to become the person God is inviting us to be, and discern and live out our vocation?
So that could be, I want to say, maybe overwhelming to some people because you use the words intense experience of prayer, right? So, and you said within that, like intense prayer, you use the word contemplation. I'm assuming you're talking about contemplative prayer in that phrase there.
Yeah, Ignatian contemplation, I think, is a little different than contemplative prayer.
Okay.
As I know you've written about. I mean, they're not dissimilar, but typically Ignatian contemplation is an imaginative exercise where we're sinking into a story, usually scripture, and putting ourselves in the scene. Ignatius would not be opposed to contemplative prayer in kind of like the Thomas Merton tradition, right? The kind of allowing, emptying our thoughts so as to allow God to direct our thoughts, right? It wouldn't be anathema to an Ignatian practice, of course. But when he's talking about it, he's really thinking about how do I sink into the scenes of Scripture, and allow myself to become a character in the story and to see what happens. What unfolds when I'm the woman at the well, or when I'm Jesus, or when I'm one of the disciples catching a fish. How does that story? How is God speaking to me through that story, both from the Scripture story to my lived story now?
Yeah, I like that because if I got you right here, like during Easter, like the Lenten season, a lot of times when I'm reading Scripture, I try to put myself in the shoes of the apostles more than Christ, because like who am I to think I could be in those shoes, right? But I hear what you're saying, and I think, like, I ask myself, if I'm in Peter's shoes, what would I have done? Would I have denied him 3 times before the cock crowed twice? Right? I don't know. Would I have been like, when the soldiers came and arrested him, would I have taken off? Would I have pulled the sword? I don't know. Right? I can sit here and say all day long that I would, but when you put yourself in those shoes and you're in that moment, I think you have different feelings. So that's pretty powerful. So I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, see, exactly. So you're already doing it, and I think it's just a different way of praying, right? It's a different way of allowing God to speak to us. Because the idea is we're not trying to stay in that story, right? We're not just trying to stay in the story of am I denying Jesus in that moment? Because we want to take those lessons or those themes and bring them into the present. Well, who is Jesus today, or where is Jesus today? How am I denying Jesus today in this moment, right? What is the sound of the cock crowing that I hear to remind me? Oh, geez, I blew it again. And then how does Jesus look on? It's all that kind of you're going back and forth between story and your own life, and seeing how the Spirit is inviting you to continue to make good decisions.
Yeah, I get it. Because like there might be a situation where like, all right, God, show me some opportunities how I can serve you today, right? And then somebody comes up to you and asks you, like a panhandler might come up to you and ask you for some money, and you're like, no way, I'm not giving you money. But maybe that was the opportunity that God was presenting to you to be of service. So and then like I can say autobiographically that sometimes I realize it after the fact. Like in
Of
other
course,
words,
me too.
I had an opportunity and I blew it, right?
Yeah, well, that's most of the times when I realize it is after the fact. Like, oh, geez, did it again. Whoops.
Yes, that's great. So, look, you're sharing this with everybody, and it's affirming to me, and I'm learning something from you as well. So, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, like, so you're a very spiritual guy, and you've written 2 books and got a third coming. As you write, do you allow, or does the Holy Spirit guide you in your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I like to think so. I think writing for me, it's almost trite to say, but is a form of prayer. And I think that I think one of the things I've been reflecting on recently in my writing is kind of identifying, because I have a couple different channels I write through, right? I write, I have an email series at work. I have a kind of a Substack. I write for different kind of outlets. And I can detect like, okay, when am I writing something that's like interesting to me and like, oh, like Eric, what a hero, versus when am I writing something that's actually useful to the reader? And I think that's the Spirit at work, right? Because I think there's that I can hear it in my tone when I'm writing, like, oh, there's the pride, or there's the desire for glory coming out on the page, as opposed to, well, what actually is a good thing to write that's going to be useful to somebody? I think that's the Spirit, right? And I think also, as much as I want to outline something or put down, here's how the book's going to progress, it never progresses that way. I mean, I rarely have articles that are like, 600 words progress as I intend to, because you're present to the words as they're coming out, and you're saying, okay, well, what is my experience? I was writing something today about prayer, about kind of like what happens when your mind wanders in prayer. And I had this idea. I'll write this down. But even then, that 600-word essay becomes something else, and it becomes insightful to me. It's a reflection back. Oh, that is an experience I've had, and I need to learn from. One of the things I've found most, I think importantly, is often I'm writing something I need to hear. Right. Which is a reflection, I think, of God at work in my story. God at work saying, hey, like, this is something for you to deepen your reflection on, because people will say, sometimes they'll say, oh, Eric, wow, you wrote that. Like, you must, they'll be surprised when they meet me in real life and I'm like, I could be a jerk. Right. They're like, well, Eric, you wrote this thing one time. And I'm like, yeah, cause I'm still working on it. Like, I haven't gotten it yet. We're all like muddling through together, trying to do our best. And, I think we all tease it out in our own lives, right? We all, like, whether you're writing or whether you're, speaking or just like whatever it is you do, like, I feel like you tease out, you have the opportunity to tease out God at work in your days.
Yeah, and I think that is so profound what you said, because I like to speak more than write. I would never consider myself a writer, even though I wrote a book and wrote a chapter in another book. To me, it was a story. I just shared a story and I had to put it in writing, right? But when I'm out speaking, like I've heard people say sometimes, hey, Rob, you're not practicing what you preach. You said this. And I say, that's because I'm a work in progress. That's because I'm struggling with that right now. And a lot of times when I come up with content to speak about, it's something I'm struggling with in the moment. And I think that's where the authenticity and the genuineness, that's a great way to say it, comes from, when you speak and write and talk about something that you're in the middle of.
Yeah, I mean, people get that, right? Because then you're a real person grappling with reality in community with the people that you're writing for, or speaking with, or whatever, as opposed to like, oh, like, let me hand the answers down to you from the mountaintop. I've already it doesn't. No one wants to to talk to that guy. I mean, unless like you're real like spiritual master and you've like descended to hand, but like that's certainly not me. And I think also, I mean, that's that like what you described, like that's the spirit at work. Like, well, why is this something I want to talk about now? Well, because it's something for me to be grappling with and thinking about. And this peace book I've been working on, I'm constantly amazed. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, that's like, I didn't do that just yesterday and need to think about like how to cultivate peace in this moment or whatever it is, and it's almost amazing to be like, wow, like, this was a project that like I needed to work on now to think through some of these ideas, and hopefully people can take it and make it better and run with these ideas and use them in their own lives.
Yeah. I mean, you said something a few minutes ago, like some of you're writing it in terms of something you needed to hear. And I've said it several times where I gave a speech to myself in front of so many people because I needed to hear it. Right.
Yeah.
So
I like
definitely on the same page there, man. Definitely on the same page. I love that. So you talk about the peace, right? So you're writing about peace now. Do you struggle obtaining peace, or is it peace amongst people, peace amongst yourself, or is it all the above?
I mean, I think it's all of the above because I think it's all connected. And one of the things, it was funny because at the end of Cannonball Moments, one of the final chapters, I talk about how one of the things I also studied kind of undergrad, and graduate school, it was peace, like, and how is peace connected to story and international relations and all these kind of things. And I was like, oh, I've always, I want to work in peace building. I think that sounds like a cool job and a cool thing, and what a great title, and like what a dramatic, resume line. And I never. I was at Catholic Relief Services for a number of years, but that was just never happened for me. It was never a job that was, I was qualified for. And the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what I'm doing? I am like, we're all called to that work. It's not like some of us are called professionally to it, but we're all called to peace work. And so I would be reading, like Henry Nouwen has a great book. It was, I think, assembled posthumously, but called Peace Work. And it's just this challenge, like as you said, like you're passing folks on the street who are looking for, for food, for money. That's an invitation to peace. Like when I get frustrated with my kids because like I want to, control my schedule and they've disrupted it. That's an invitation to peace. Like peace is happening in these small moments and big moments, and so it has to start within. Like whether or not we're going to be dramatic peace builders, on the humanitarian stage, or just going about our daily lives. Like peace is a sinking into, again, who God has invited us to be. I think I am convinced if we are comfortable in who we are, and if we are comfortable in our own vocation, I'm meant to be a writer, not a doctor, for example. The more we sink into that identity and become who we are, who we are called to be, the more we are at peace within, and then can be peaceful without. And that again goes back to Ignatian spirituality. Ignatius is all about discerning our vocation, but there's also this word, the magis, means more in Latin, and folks will often say, oh, it means like doing more push-ups, getting more internships, making more money, and that's not it. It's actually one way to think about it. My own spiritual director encouraged this, was like, it's not about like that external more. It's about like becoming more you. Like, how can I bring more of my authentic self into the world? And that's the vocation question. I think the more we can kind of deepen that, delve into that, the more we're prepared to be a manifestation of peace in our days, because I'm comfortable in my own skin. I'm comfortable with what I have. I'm not trying to scrounge up all this other stuff. I can live my life. And then that, I think I've made my, just beating the dead horse here, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah. So what I heard you say is like, you want to be at peace with yourself. And
yeah.
Is that another way of saying like content with who you are and with who God made you to be? Would you put that as contentment and peace in the same sentence?
Yeah, I think there's I don't want to give the impression of accepting a status quo, because I think there's two things here, right? I think there's the more we become. There's a great line by the Jesuit French paleontologist Teilhard de Chardin. He says something to the effect of, the more we descend into ourselves, the more we encounter God at the heart of our being, something like that. And then the more we're able to realize Christ, the incarnation of Christ in the world. And so that's a very constant. That's a movement, right? That's not I'm happy where I am, I've arrived, I can just sit. That's there's more here in me uniquely that can come out into the world and be a force for good. So I think that's a tension. It's a creative tension, right? Like how can we both be content and present where we are, happy where we are, and who we are, and not kind of, lust after oh, this person is so wealthy, this person is so attractive, this person has such a great job. While also saying, but there's always more for me to become in this world, for other people, for myself, to manifest God's love in the world. So I think that's the tension, and I think that's that.
Yeah,
I'm still writing about that.
Yeah. So you talk about that tension. So it's like you mentioned like that whole like worrying about what this person's doing and compare yourself to this and to that and the other thing, right? And yet, so the tension I feel at times is that, okay, sometimes I do make those comparisons and I'm like, well, I'm capable of more, but more what, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got these gifts and abilities that I feel like I'm discovering and learning about every day. And then the question becomes, God, how do you want me to use these gifts? What opportunities, like I pray, bring me the opportunities, or allow me, because the opportunities are there. It's to allow me to see them, to use the gifts, because they never disappeared. They've always been there. It's just we have this block because we haven't allowed ourselves to get close to him. That's what I think. That's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think it's a prayer for clarity, right? A prayer for clarity. There's another kind of foundational Ignatian spirituality principle is this idea of Ignatian indifference. And indifference, we think, oh, apathetic, and that's not at all it. Indifference, Ignatius says at the very beginning of the spiritual exercises, it's the presupposition. No, it's not. It's the first principle and foundation. And in that he invites us to pray, to be indifferent to all things. I don't want to hold tightly to anything. I want to be available to respond to God's will in my life as God reveals it. And so, like, says, I'm indifferent to good health or to bad health, to riches or to poverty, wherever I'm meant to go. And so I think the image is always like, am I holding fast with a tight fist, or am I open and available to however God is asking me to respond? And I think so that indifference, again, rather than being apathetic, is actually very passionate. I am so committed and passionate about doing good in the world. There's so many options. Rather than me put my thumb on the scale, I want to kind of respond to the signs of the times. Where does God need me to go? And how are the people and the context and the environment around me revealing that to me, right? Because I think, again, God is in all things. So everything can reveal to us God's will, God's desire for our lives as we move forward. We have to be attentive, though, to it, right? And again, you write about that too. So.
Yeah, so you said something, though, because I'm glad you brought it up, because I was reading this earlier and I wanted to ask you about the word indifference. Mm-hmm. And indifference, I know, is big in Stoicism. Mm-hmm. And I asked the question, can a Stoic be a Christian? And I think the answer is yes. But I think, like, indifference, you use the word apathy, right? And I'm like, and I struggle with it sometimes. So indifference, like the way I'm hearing you say, you're open to anything, right? But like sometimes I think in a apathetic way, and correct me if I'm wrong, or even tag on to it, is like if something happens, it can be like, well, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm who cares? I'm just indifferent to it. And maybe I'm not saying that right. But things aren't going to change. I remember one time, my mom, she's got dementia, and she fell, and I was out, and I didn't have my phone on me at the time. And I went in my car, and I got to notice she fell, and she's on the way to the hospital. And I'm like, nothing's going to change between now and the time I get to the hospital, whether I get, and this might sound awful, or it might sound right. I don't know. Nothing's going to change between now and the time I get there. She's at the hospital. She's in care. She's not going to die. She's not in a situation where she might die. I'll get there when I get there. And I'm not saying I'll get there tomorrow. I'm going to get there, whether I get there in 15 minutes or a half hour. What's the difference? So like, in being indifferent there, is that apathetic or is that apathetic, or is that just, okay, it's good, accept what it is, and you'll get there when you get there without anybody getting hurt or being in further danger? I don't know if I'm confusing you or confusing myself or what.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're bringing a lot of good points. Yeah, so I mean, I do think a Stoic can be a Christian, although just because I know a few, but I don't know enough about Stoicism to make like a super intelligent comment. As I think when we're talking about Ignatian indifference, right? Apathetic, it all comes down to, well, what is the context, right? So if you are really sitting in your car being like, doesn't matter, I can't do any good, nothing matters, I'm gonna go like swing through the McDonald's drive-through, take my time, like nothing, that's not good. That's probably not great.
No.
But if you're saying, okay, instead of me sitting in this car and freaking out because I
Right.
can't get there right now,
Right.
I am going to say, you know what? There's literally nothing more I can do. I've done all I can. I'm going to get myself safely there. I'm going to trust in the staff that are at the hospital, and I'm going to make my way. I'm going to make sure I'm fed, and I make sure I have what I need to be of service when I arrive.
Yes.
I think that's great. I mean, one of the things that Ignatius was always big about with the early Jesuits, and this trend kind of holds today, is you have to have what you need to do the mission, right? To do the work. You have to, if you can't run yourself ragged, and say like, oh, well, aren't I great? Like, no, like if you a great example is when I started working at the Jesuits, I was going to Jordan. I was visiting Jordan to do some filming, and I booked the cheapest flight, the cheapest route, and I was like, well, this will save money, and it did, except for my flight was delayed immediately. I missed a connection in Toronto, which then put me in Frankfurt for an entire day, and I arrived 2 days late to my week trip in Jordan. And when I came back, my supervisors were like, well, dude, like, you got to like pay the money to do the mission. Like if like you're not helping anybody by kind of, flagellating yourself in this way. If you aren't doing the thing you need to do, which is again, the work of the Lord. Right. So again, the other thing with indifference to always think about, I think, is what are we good at, right? What are we? And again, a story I tell in the Cannonball moments is I remember riding with so many. I used to live in Charles Village in Baltimore, right? And so I would take the bus with a lot of Hopkins students or doctors or whatever to get downtown. And I'd be like, man, oh man, like these folks are really doing it. They're really saving lives. They're doing good. Like, what am I doing? I'm going downtown to write some stuff at CRS. Well, that's not like that. Those are my gifts are not in medicine, are not in science, are not in like anything that has to do with that. Like that's not. So why am I sitting there wishing I could do their job when I could really instead say, thank God, like I could delight in the great work that these folks are doing, and then do the work that I've been called to do. And so I think that also comes in with indifference. Is like you don't just sit and say, well, everything is possible and I'll like wait for the wind to blow me in the right direction. You instead say like, well, what am I passionate about? What do I desire? Where is God? How has God been at work in my life? What are the patterns? What are the skills I bring to the moment? You're looking at yourself and you're looking at your context, and then you're acting, right? So it's all informed by you as a full person. Yeah, I feel like I just went like in 8 different tangents.
No,
So hopefully one of those was to the point of the question.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. So it sounds like it's a practice in humility as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit because you mentioned it once or twice already. So you wrote this book, Cannonball Moments, right? And you already mentioned it. It was based off of some Ignatian experience. You said he got hit by a cannonball in the leg, right?
Right. Yes.
So can you get into that a little bit as far as what inspired you to write this, and a little bit about what the book's about?
Yeah. So that book, I've always been interested in Ignatian spirituality and storytelling, right? As I kind of describing, like I think Ignatian spirituality as a spiritual toolbox can really help us understand our own stories, right? Our own personal stories, our stories as they intersect with other people, and so on. I mean, Cannonball Moments, it's kind of a cute title. It points to this it's kind of almost a flippant term that folks use in the kind of the wider Ignatian community. Ignatius gets hit by a cannonball, right? And that's what forces him to reevaluate his entire life, right? And it's not a done deal. It's not like, oh, like he got hit by a cannonball and became a saint. That's not it at all. In fact, he gets hit by a cannonball and then he spends 11 months in bedridden, unable to go anywhere. One imagines feeling quite guilty for having kind of led all of his his fellow soldiers to their deaths in many ways, right? So it's this intense moment of who am I now? I was a soldier, but I'm not going to be a soldier anymore. I was a man about court, but I can't return to court because my, et cetera, et cetera. And so we all have those moments, I think, in our lives, these opportunities to reassess, who are we becoming? What are we doing as we become that thing? And then do we accept that opportunity to reassess, or do we say, nope, I'm going to just kind of maintain the status quo as opposed to take this opportunity to think about myself. The other thing about Cannonball Moments, not the book, I mean the book, but the idea is I'm convinced, as I've probably alluded to, right, that God is at work in the ordinary, nitty gritty, mundane details of our lives too. It's not just these cannonball moments. It's the average quiet moments as well. And so we look for God in all of that, and all of that is what makes us able to make these good decisions as we assess our lives and our current moments.
Interesting you just said that, because, like I told you before we got on the call here, cannonball moments. I thought I was, the first thought was, aha, big moments, right? And like you said, there can be these very small, big, life defining moments out of something small, right? And I think I just had an aha today as we're talking here, because it's like, okay, we say these big moments change trajectories in our lives, but what about the small moments? They probably change trajectory in our lives and we don't even know it.
Yeah, but we could know it, right? My spiritual director always used to say, God works in patterns. God works in patterns in our lives, but are we aware of the patterns in our lives? Are we looking to see, well, how has God worked with me before? Oh, my anxiety leads me to this, but if I'm mindful of something, I actually can see how it gets me here. Like anything in your own life. And the other thing about cannonball moments, people have asked me sometimes when I'll give presentations, people will come and say, well, hey, can you have a planned cannonball moment? And I was like, oh, say more. That's a great question. And they're like, well, if I'm moving to a new city. I'm like, wow, like what a great insight. Like cannonball moments, again, if, for me, kind of who's working with Ignatian spirituality, like you're always like, oh, like the guy gets hit by a cannonball, that's a terrible thing. But in fact, this idea of, oh, like when I intentionally pick up my life and move across the country or take a new job or get married or have a kid, right? These are, things that are probably in some ways, like, you're prepping for it. Unlike a cannonball hitting you in the leg. And yet still that's a big moment that requires that gives you the chance to reassess, who am I today? How am I going to become the person I believe God wants me to be? Even in these good opportunities, not just the right. Bad and the traumatic.
So it's like asking yourself in a change of season,
yes.
Who am I supposed to be, or what am I supposed to do? And that's a moment. That's a cannonball moment.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you've said it a couple of times as well. Another thing you said, you're spiritual director. Talk to me, because I know what it means, but can you talk to the public and talk to the audience? So, you have some spiritual direction. Is it something you do daily? Is it something you do weekly, monthly, annually? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so a spiritual director, just in short, is like someone who's accompanying you in the spiritual life. For the spiritual exercises of Ignatius in particular, you want to have a director, not because that person has the answers or is telling you what to do. In fact, if they do have the answers or tell you what to do, they're a lousy director. These are folks that are trained in the ability to reflect back to you how God is at work in your life, right? Oh, I hear this. Oh, you've said that. Or, oh, you know what? 3 months ago, you actually said something similar. Do you think there's a pattern at work, right? That's kind of what a director does, or a spiritual companion. Now, the exercises of Ignatius really require a director. And that usually you would meet, depending, if you do them in everyday life, there's different ways to do them. I met with the director once a week. Now I've finished those. And so now I meet with a Jesuit about once every 6 weeks or so. It's as someone finds useful, but it's just good because you have that reflection, that reflector back and forth. And what I've actually found in direction, and I'll show up to, I'll say, oh, I did a lousy job praying this month, and I don't think there's much to talk about. And my director will say, oh yeah, okay, well, let's talk about that. And then 45 minutes later, something like, geez, oh whiz, God was really, really busy this month in my life as I've had this conversation, right? And so even the act of engaging in spiritual conversation in that way kind of ferrets out the spirit at work in our lives.
It's like, I mean, let's face it, we're having a spiritual conversation right now. And whether you or I are having aha moments or moments of enlightenment during this conversation, there's direction here. There is. And so, like when you talk about the director, I'm hearing you say, and I'm picturing, you're coming to the table with some stuff, and instead of the director giving you answers, he's asking you questions about what you're struggling with, whatever it is. So you have to almost self-discover.
Yeah. Or what my director used to, he's since passed away, but he used to sit in silence. he would just sit in silence and stare at me, and we would do it on Zoom, so you're like, geez, like I'm just like staring into the camera, and it was so funny. He was known for this. This is something he was known for, and eventually he was like, all right, I gotta say something, and like that was how he pulled the spirit out of you. You're like, yeah, all right, you know what you're doing, man. You know what you're doing. People, these are folks that are trained. They've studied this, and they're working with so many people that. I imagine, because I am not one, I'm not the director, but I imagine like you see patterns, not just in your own life, but in the course of humanity, as you're engaging with people, as they're accompanying people kind of, to God.
Yeah, that's great, man. I'm sitting there thinking like how frustrating it must be when you're sitting there and you're waiting for somebody to say something. Because I'm not a big fan of in a conversation there being silence. I'm like, Rob, shut up and don't say anything. Shut up and don't say anything. Just be quiet. Just be quiet. But that can be frustrating at times, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, it doesn't lend itself well for podcasting, right? Silence, but for that kind of conversation, you're like, oh man, like I gotta think, I gotta look at myself, or I'm just gonna stare at this dude on the screen here and hope he says something. So yeah, I mean, silence is a spiritual practice, right? And
it is.
And to be able to insert that into conversation where you'd think, by its definition, it's not silent. It's pretty good. It's pretty can be masterfully done.
That's awesome. Yeah. So man, look, I appreciate everything you're talking about today. And there's so much here. It can be overwhelming for some people. Obviously, you and I are on the same page. And if somebody like you've been doing it for a while, so if somebody just wanted to get started on this journey, what would you encourage them to do out of the gate?
I mean, if you I guess it depends on where we're starting. If you're trying to learn about Ignatian spirituality, there's just a couple good intro books. I know Father Jim Martin has his book, the Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, is a great just kind of primer on that. There's a bunch of other good ones too. But I think key to the spiritual life, right, is community. Like you got to have. I think you got to have a faith home, where you're challenged and where you're thinking, and even if you don't agree with everything, you're like, all right, well, we're all kind of muddling through this together, and we all find God in different ways, and how, but you don't know that if you're just by yourself in a room, it's I think very helpful to bounce ideas about, what are we doing spiritually around the room with other people. So whether that's, going to church, which is, what I do, or you have a small group of kind of other folks that are just praying. I think that's all really helpful. And then you find spiritual reading. I think that's really helpful too. And I just go from there. I don't know. What do you say? What's your?
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking. I agree with the synergy. I think having conversations, one-on-one conversations, journaling. I journal a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful. You get the noise out of your head or the thoughts out of your head. You get it on paper, and then you see it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's helpful. I lead a men's fellowship group the first Saturday of every month. We have these conversations, and I don't go into that environment like I know it all. I go in there, I want to learn, right? So I might bring a topic to the table, like we did 2 months ago. I said 2 words: grace and mercy, and we went on a 45-minute conversation on those 2 words. Right. And I wanted to hear what people thought about it. Right. So that was synergy. Right. That was community, us coming together and talking about different views on grace and mercy. And so it was really interesting. So, yeah, I think there's several different ways to embark on that journey. But, but somebody might be like, they might be having I really want to get to know God. Right. I really want to start a spiritual journey. You're not going to dive right in deep right away because it could be overwhelming. So there's got to be some starting spot, like whether that's being quiet for a minute a day or journaling maybe a minute, whatever. I think you got to start small and work your way into it and get quiet. Just get quiet and listen.
I absolutely. I think too, there's a disposition of noticing, right? And I've been thinking, if we believe God is in all things, right? Well, where is God now? And I have this image. I like to work in images sometimes. And my daughter and I were at Double Rock, the park. We're kind of walking, the nature trail, and there was this butterfly just was there. We're like, why is it just sitting there? And we watched that butterfly for 15 minutes. We just kind of followed it around, and that's not an inherently spiritual or holy or it wasn't like lightning came down, but that these those simple moments where you're just kind of noticing. I would say God at work in the world, and it is a spiritual practice that begins to say to you, oh, I'm not just going to have my, just walk fast or look in my, my phone or whatever, but what is happening, and how can I sit with it? to the point of almost discomfort. How can I sit with the real, to a point of like, maybe I've been here too long, but you know what? God is still working, and God's going to still be working even when I walk on. I think that's an easy spiritual, not easy. But it's a spiritual practice that you can do anywhere, anytime.
Well, yeah, because you made me think of the book, The Noticer. You ever hear the book? It's called The Noticer. I think Andy Andrews wrote it, and and it's about noticing things. And to me, that's awareness, right? You want to be aware. And there's another word I like to use: awe. I want to be in awe, right?
Yeah,
so
wonder
to be
and
in awe
awe.
of something, you got to notice something. You got to be aware of something, right? And I think if we can live our lives looking to be in awe of something, knowing that God's behind it, I'm like, that's awesome. That's really awesome. So
yeah.
So Eric, look, as we wrap up here today, I always ask this question to everybody. And the question is this, how much more chiseling do you got going on in your life, from God?
How much is there to come? A lot, I hope.
There you go. Well, you're not the finished product, right?
No, yeah. No, I mean, I'll say that one thing I've been thinking about a lot is my, the kind of control versus delight, how much I want to control stuff. Right now, I think that's where God is kind of chiseling me, like, let go. And I think the turn you can make is, instead of wanting to control a situation, how can I delight in what's happening and delight in the people? And that's right now is like, I think the chiseling, that's at least God's trying to do. I don't know how open I am to it happening, but I can feel that being like this is the thing to be thinking about. How am I turning with the disposition of delight rather than a need to control the moment?
Yeah, but what's going to happen is those situations are going to come up, and you may notice them in the moment, and you may say, "Oh, that was him trying to get me to be in delight instead of control." Right? That could happen. And so the word that keeps playing on me for the last several weeks, I would say, is the word detachment. And it's almost the same, let go, right? Surrender, let go, detach. And it's you just keep going at it. And then what can I detach myself of that I want to be too attached to, that I need to let go of?
So,
interesting stuff.
Open hand. Yeah.
Open hand. Yeah. Because there's a lot of tension here. There's a lot of, it's calm, right? It's peace, right?
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
There you go. So Eric, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you and talk more about this stuff, or talk a little bit more what you do, how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So my website, ericclaytonwrites.com. And my Gmail, you can, if you fill it out there, you can get a hold of me by just ericclaytonwrites@gmail.com. So happy to talk to anybody. I'm on various social media platforms, but my website's probably a good place to start. And I love talking about this stuff. So always happy to do it.
Awesome stuff. Eric, look, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your knowledge and your wisdom on this whole subject. And I'm sure we're going to be talking a little more. And I thank Katie again for introducing us. And I'm looking forward to sharing this with everybody. So thank you so much for being here. Yeah, thank you. And
thank you, Rob. It was a good time. Great conversation.
You're welcome. And until next time, everybody, let's go get chiseled.